The Detroit Lions should trade for Trey Hendrickson. It would be the perfect trade for a Madden franchise that you've ever seen in your entire life. But here's why it don't make any sense. It's for the Detroit Lions. Now, it came out yesterday from NFL Network. Tom Pelissero, Ian Rappaport reported that the Bengals were listening to trade offers for pass rusher Trey Hendrickson and contract talks at impasse. So the Bengals are a cheap franchise. We all know that. They routinely do this to people, including T. Higgins. They've done it before. They're going to do it again. And when they say they're listening to trade offers, I want you to just think about how stupid that is, because the Bengals since 1972 in training camp and in season trade has made one trade in season since 1972. They've made 3 trades since 2013. They're not a team that just gives up at the farm, or they don't make these roster moves just because. The last major trade that they made was, I believe it was Carson Palmer. There's a couple more, but they were like minuscule compared to Carson Palmer being a quarterback. And Jordan Schultz reported that the Panthers, Browns, Colts, and among other teams that have shown interest in trading for Bengals All-Pro Trey Hendrickson per multiple sources. An in-division trade, in-state trade is highly, highly unlikely, and any deal will be tough regardless. Cincinnati is believed to want an impact player or two, plus a draft pick in return. And it just goes to show you, like, the Detroit Lions could trade for Trey Hendrickson. It would make sense from every standpoint that you think of. You know, you're going to get an edge opposite Hutchinson. You don't believe in Marcus Davenport being a full-time fixture on the defensive line. He hasn't stayed healthy for years. But here's where it don't make any sense. So if you go back to the Eagles, I hear this all the time. I think it's the dumbest take that I could ever imagine. People will be like, oh my God, but the Eagles, they had a great defensive line. Do you realize that the Eagles' defensive line, there was not one player that made over $12 million? Not one player. What made the Eagles' defensive line last year so impressive was the depth that they had. It wasn't because of the star players they had. They drafted Jalen Carter. They drafted Jordan Davis. They drafted a lot of those guys. Brandon Graham was on the backside of his career. Josh Sweat was the guy that they added through trade. Still didn't make over $12 million. I think he might have made 12.3 or something like that, but not over 12.5. It just goes to show you there's so many ways to get done. Now, if you are a Trey Hendrickson guy and you want the Detroit Lions to part with someone for Trey Hendrickson because there is an impactful player that needs to be added to the deal, you probably would have to give up Brian Branch. You probably would have to give up Brian Branch or Jack Campbell. And I'm sorry. You have the 2 best safety tandem in the NFL, in Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch. Jack Campbell is going to become a future leader of this defense. Under no circumstances am I going to go pay the freight for Trey Hendrickson. And look, it makes all the sense in theory. Makes all the sense in theory. When you think about Trey Hendrickson, you think about him to the Detroit Lions, you think, God, this guy could be so great in the Detroit Lions uniform. But here's the problem. When you look across the NFL, who's the opposite side of Myles Garrett? Who's the opposite side of Max Crosby? Who is the opposite side of, there's one franchise that does have a bunch of pass rushers, just the New York Giants. They have Dexter Lawrence as a defensive tackle, Brian Burns, Abdul Carter, Kayvon Thibodeau. That's it. Like, when you think about the top pass rushers, who's on the opposite side of Micah Parsons? Can't name them. Actually, in Dallas, they're talking about the same thing. But Micah Parsons is so good, you really don't care. You know, this is something that a lot of fans don't understand. And it might not be all fans, but it's just some fans in particular. They want to make these fantasy trades because they think it makes sense in theory. When it's in theory, in real life, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. When you think about, you would have to pay 2 defensive ends a boatload of money. You're talking 30 million plus, at least, right? And then you're talking about, well, we're going to have to give up someone. Oh, we're going to have to give up, Brian Branch. We're going to have to give up Jack Campbell. We're going to have to give up this guy. You're breaking apart your team. So it's addition by subtraction. So you take Trey Hendrickson, you add him to defensive end. So you got 2 great defensive ends. That's great. You lose a player in Brian Branch, or you lose a linebacker in Jack Campbell. And at that point in time, by making your front seven better, you made your back end worse. So it's a give and take. And the best franchises don't waste their time with it. You think about a lot of people were upset when the Detroit Lions lost out in the trade for Chase Young when the 49ers got him. It didn't lead to a Super Bowl. And when you think about, the teams that have won Super Bowls, it's because they have they're flexible and they're capable of doing things their roster. The Eagles were not the Eagles just because of the defensive line. They had a great linebacker crew. Their safety group was hella good, and they could run the ball. And that's why they won the Super Bowl. So when people use these lazy examples, like, oh, the Philadelphia Eagles, that's something we should emulate. If you wanted to emulate the Philadelphia Eagles, you would do the same thing you're doing for what Holmes is doing right now. See, the issue here is a lot of people thought, oh my God, they had a great defensive line. How'd they do it? They had tons of depth where they could just, this guy goes out, this guy comes in. This guy goes out, this guy comes in. Jordan Davis comes in for Jalen Carter. This guy comes in. Brandon Graham on the backside of his career comes in. Boom, 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 boom. They had depth. Depth wins in the playoffs. Depth wins you Super Bowls. And when I think about what people say, it makes me it makes me laugh, because some of these people have these assumptions of how you make a deal. And like I said, when you look at the teams that are interested in Trey Hendrickson, the Panthers, the Browns, the Colts, all those teams in particular have nothing to give besides a high draft pick. You don't see no Eagles on there. You don't see no Chiefs on there. You don't see no Cowboys on there. You don't see no Commanders on there. Why? Because they're not going to be willing to, subtract an addition. We know that the Bengals are a hard team to deal with. I mean, their own players have a tough time getting things done. So when you think about what the Detroit Lions have to do in the future with all the contracts they have coming, they're not going to be able to pay everyone. But when you take someone off like Brian Branch, who's going to take Brian Branch's spot? Who's going to give you, maybe a little bit less than what Brian Branch gives you? That's a tall task. And that's why the Detroit Lions are not going to be, able to swing the trade for Trey Hendrickson. And like I said before, the Bengals have only made one trade in season since 1972. They're not in the business to give players away. They've never been in the business to make these broad deals. They're the Bengals. This is who they are. This is what they do, and they don't make many trades at all. I mean, they made 3 since 2013. 3. That's not a lot. So it would make sense in theory. The Detroit Lions should trade for Trey Hendrickson, but they won't be able to. That's just the perfect way to put it. They will not be able to. Whether you think they could do it by giving away a player or whatever the case, or going all in, as some of these people say, yeah, you can go all the way in, but what did it cost you? What did it cost you? That's the major issue when you talk about cost versus what you buy. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with Trey Hendrickson, but I guarantee you something. He will not be a Detroit Lion. I can guarantee you that. I'll see you in the next video of Detroit Lions football, JC Sports YouTube. Please like, subscribe, and we will keep you entertained throughout the football season. So please like, subscribe.